last week we started a series called Nearing the Beginning. Nearing the Beginning. And it's a series really just looking at this last week of, you would say, Jesus' earthly life and his earthly ministry before he went to the cross. And so it's nearing the beginning. And as Jesus' earthly life, his ministry was coming to a close, it was really only just the beginning. And really that's why he came to earth for, was to die on the cross for us and our sins, to rise from the grave victorious. And it was really just the beginning of what was coming. And it was the beginning of the new covenant, the new relationship between God and humanity. And so that's why I've called it Nearing the Beginning, and because we're just looking at Jesus' last week here on earth, so some of those things that he did, some of those things that he said. And if you missed last week, we talked about Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem, and just a few things around that. If you've missed that message, you'll be up on YouTube this coming week, as will this message. But today, if you've got your Bibles, I'd love for you to open them to Matthew chapter 21. And so this here is just the heading in your Bible. It's going to be where Jesus clears the temple, or Jesus cleanses the temple, all right? And so Jesus, he's rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. There's been this big commotion. People have laid down their coats, they've laid down palm branches. Jesus riding in, this wanted man, someone who had a price on his head. And then shortly after, so I don't know whether it was directly after this or the next day, doesn't really matter. It's basically straight after this. And this is what it says. Matthew 21 verse 12 to 14, it says, Jesus entered the temple and began to drive out all the people buying and selling animals for sacrifice. He knocked over the tables of the money changers and the chairs of those selling doves. He said to them, the scriptures declare, my temple will be called a house of prayer, but you have turned it into a den of thieves, or we could say a house of trade. And the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. All right, so Jesus has rode into Jerusalem. There's been a big commotion. Next minute, he goes into the temple, and here's another big commotion. And chairs are flying, tables are being turned over. You would say, well, where's the part where Jesus had the whip and he pulled it out? That account is only in the Gospel of John, and it's actually earlier on. So John chapter 2 or 3. And so we don't know whether Jesus has already done this or whether John's just wrote it in earlier. You can picture Jesus with the whip if you want to. And he's in there, he's turning over tables. So there's a commotion going on. But as we read here, where Jesus cleansed the temple, by driving out the merchants and money changers, overturning their tables and declaring it a house of prayer rather than a house of trade. There's a few things I really just want to look at today. And the first thing is this, it's the event. So Jesus entered the temple and he saw merchants and money changers operating within its sacred grounds. So we're going to touch on that very shortly. And then there's Jesus' action where he drove out all who were buying and selling. He overturned the tables of the money changers and he scattered the pigeons. And I can just imagine that there's like pigeons flying off everywhere out of their cages. There's a few pigeons just down the road from us, and you can just see the feathers everywhere. That's just sort of what I sort of envision, like pigeons flying out everywhere, chairs being knocked over. And then there's Jesus' reasoning. Jesus accused them of turning the temple into a house of trade or a den of thieves, just depends on your translation of the Bible, contrasting it with its intended purpose of being a house of prayer. So he says, hey, you've made it a den of thieves, you made a house of trade rather than a house of prayer. And then there's the significance of it. And this act is seen as a demonstration of Jesus' authority and his commitment to the purity of worship. And so in this captivating story, and if you really get into it, I like to picture myself right in there and just imagine what's going on, the sounds, the smells. Has anyone ever sprayed or smelt a deodorant that you used to wear like you were back in school? For me, it's like if someone wears Brute, like the Brute men's deodorant, if someone sprays that around, it takes me back to when I was in school, because that's what I used to wear, grade 11 and 12, and it's straight away you start thinking about these things you did. Anyway, that's how I like to sort of picture of what's going on here in the Bible, in these stories. And in this captivating story, Jesus, he confronts greed and corruption within the religious sphere by driving out merchants who had turned a sacred space into a marketplace. And as we look at these, few verses, it reflects Jesus' devotion to upholding holiness and purity while challenging Christians to emulate, so to copy the actions of his example of courageous righteousness in our lives. All right, so as I said, I really want you to sort of paint this picture in your mind and sort of go back there. And if any of you have watched The Passion, that sort of helps you sort of understand and picture things for those of you who maybe can't picture things that well. But that really describes, Jesus, his disciples really well. But I want you to picture this, all right? So Jesus, he comes into Jerusalem. There's this, all this emotion, there's all this action going on with him riding in, and he actually is challenging the religious leaders of the time. He's saying, hey, I'm coming in as a king. And so last week I talked about the significance of that, him riding in on a donkey saying that, hey, he's the king, he's coming, but we're not coming to fight, it's coming to bring peace. And then shortly after, it's like, well, hey, for me, if I was Jesus, I'll be like to the disciples, say, hey, you think they're angry at me now, you just wait till what I'm about to do. That's how I would act. Jesus is a lot bigger than me, he's better than me, but I would have been to the disciples, hey, check this out. These Pharisees, these religious people, they're going to get real cranky with me now. If they wanted to kill me before, well, hey, you better just hold on to your seats. All right? And so he goes in there and he just turns these tables upside down. He comes against them and he says, hey, this is not on. And so why were there money changers? And so as we read this, we just think, oh, yeah, there's money changers. There's people selling animals, doves there. But why were there? Because this is the week of Passover. So once a year, the Jewish people would come to Jerusalem. So people have traveled, days, weeks even to come here to really to celebrate together, to worship God together on this special week in Jerusalem at the temple. And so for all males 20 years and older, you had to pay what they would call a temple tax, which would go to really just the upkeep of the temple. So in our terms today, it was like paying your tithe or paying your offering. And so that, from the age of 20 up, it's just what you had to do. And so people were marked down. It's like they were ticked off the box saying, I've paid this. But here's something else we need to realise as well, is that in this time, in this region, there wasn't just one currency of money. There were about 4, 5, or even 6 currencies, but they were all equal the same amount. All right, so it's like, say if we're here today, we go into shops, you pull out your wallet, you've got the Australian dollar, you might have a few New Zealand dollars in there, you could have a few euros, you may even have a few US dollars, a few British pounds, and no matter what it is, it's all the same. And that's really how their currency worked. But to pay the temple tax, you had to pay the half shekel of this certain currency. I can't quite remember what it is now, but it's like you had to pay that. And so there were money changers who would say, okay, give me your money and I'll put it into the right amount. And so what they were doing is they were putting a fee onto it. Like you go to a shop, you use your card and it's like, there's going to be a surcharge. And it's like, bruh, I've just paid for the groceries. You want to give me another $3 or $4 just for using my card? It's same thing was going on here, but it was a high amount. And so, again, there's a corruption here because it's like, hey, these people have travelled to worship God, and instead of just saying, hey, let's just swap this money out, let's make it so you can pay it, it's like, we're going to charge you for it. We're going to make a few extra dollars on the side. So that's one thing that's going on. The other thing is, like, you can say, they were selling pigeons or they were selling animals there, you would say, in the courtyard of the temple. Again, why is this significant? It's like, well, were there not any other animals just out in the town? And the answer is yes, there was. But before you could bring your animal to the temple for your sacrifice, it had to be checked off by a priest to say that it was all good, to say that it was, there were no blemishes, that it was, a clean, perfect animal. And so what else was going on is, and this is really dodge, all right, but if you went up the street and just bought it, and then you come to the temple with it, the priest would check it over and say, nah, there's something wrong with that one, but leave that one here, come inside and buy one of these ones. They've all been checked. But instead of paying $5 for it, we're going to charge you 10. All right? And so, again, money making, okay? A bit of corruption, a bit of things not morally right going on here. And so this is what is going on, all right? And so there's these money changes, there's people selling animals, but the markup is way higher. These people have travelled there. They've sacrificed already to come to Jerusalem to worship and praise God. And what's more important than that? But now it's like we're getting ripped off as well. I just think on the way there, it's just like, well, are we going to go uptown and buy the dove or sheep that we need? Or are we just going to, go to the temple and get ripped off? And we may as well, that way we'll save a few dollars at the back end of it, say buying 2 animals. They're the sort of conversations I'll be having with myself or my wife as we're travelling to Jerusalem to get this stuff done. And then we got the temple, all right, the temple courtyard, all right. And so why is this significant? I want you to really picture it sort of like the church here. This will help you understand, all right. You got the building here, which you would say is the temple. Inside's the Holy Holies. That's part of it. But say we've got our yard, it's fenced off. And in a similar way, that's how the courtyards were in the temple. It's like there was the main temple building, and then around it was fenced off, or stone walls around it. But within that, it was broken off into sections. All right, it wasn't just one big open yard. It was broken off. There was the section or the part of the courtyard where like only the priests could go. All right, they had separate gates to go into them, and they were all blocked off within that. It's like only the priests could go into that section. Well, that was the part for only the Jews, so the Jewish men. And then there was another part for just the Jewish women. And then there was the other part which was for everyone else, which they would call the Gentiles. So if you were a non-Jewish person, but you still wanted to come and worship God because you believed in him, you could go to this other section. And lo and behold, where are we selling all the sheep? Where are we selling all the pigeons? Where are all the money changes going on? It's in the Gentiles section. So these people who had no other place of where they could worship, it's like, well, hey, their place, their courtyard, their area had been run over. All right, and so just imagine it. You're coming in to worship, and there's people bartering for money. There's sheep bleeding. There's pigeons flapping around and feathers going everywhere. People talking to each other, and you're like, I'm coming in here to pray, to talk to God, to worship him, but this place is run over. It stinks of sheep and pigeons, all right? And it's just like, how am I meant to worship God here in this place? So this is what's going on, all right? And so Jesus, he comes in, and he basically just says, enough's enough, all right? Just think about this. Jesus is roughly 33 years old. This isn't the first time he's seen it. He's been coming here since at least he was 20. He was coming there even before that. So he's got many years of seeing this, and I think all those years it would have just been breaking his heart. And now he comes to a point in life where it's just like, now enough's enough. Now let's get back to why we're here. Let's get back to the real purpose of this temple, the real reasoning why we're here and worshipping God. You see, Jesus, he confronted extortion. He confronted corruption. He confronted the misuse and abuse of temple priests' power and authority. He confronted the morality. He confronted injustice towards a people group that they deemed not important enough. He confronted their hearts about worship. Yeah, and we can read this account, and I've been guilty of this in the past as well. It's like you're reading this and you think, yeah, how dare they do that? How dare they be selling livestock there? How dare they be denying those people a place to worship? And we can read that and think, yeah, how dare they do that? How dare they do that to God's house? But I want to challenge us with this today. Have we been guilty of extortion or corruption? And you think, well, I don't think so. I haven't built some pyramid scheme and ripped people out of money, but maybe there are other ways that hey, we have been a little bit dodgy in the way that we've done things. Maybe at work, maybe it's when you've been going to sell something privately. And I'm all for making a few dollars. Don't get me wrong. I'll sell something for dearer than what I bought it for. It's making a few dollars, but there's a the other aspect of it where it's like, hey, you actually are being dodgy about it, all right? And you're being corrupt, you're being even immoral about it or corrupt. And I remember quite a few years ago, this was back when I was managing the abattoir down just outside of Dalby, and I'm a butcher by trade, all right, and working in an abattoir, so there's a lot of weights and scales going on. There's a proverb that says, hey, dishonest scales, dishonest weights are an abomination to the Lord. Like, God hates that stuff, all right? And so I remember there was one time I was working and I was on the scales measuring the pigs or weighing the pigs as they come along. And to do that, it's like you got to take off the amount of what the hooks are, all right? So just say the hooks were a kilo. You take a kilo off the weight before you do everything. Anyway, 5 or 6 had come past and we changed the size of them, and so they were out. So, they were out by about half a kilo. And so I went back, I looked at them like, oh no, I've done 5 or 6 the wrong weight. And I'm like, it's in our favour. It's in the boss's favour. He's going to win here. It's not that big of a deal. But then this verse come to me. It's like, dishonest scales and weights are an abomination. I'm like, fair enough. So slide them all back, which is annoying. Slide them all back and let's reweigh these properly. All right? And so you think, have I been guilty of corruption, of extortion? No, but maybe not in that terms, but there are other little simple ways that we can do things a bit dodgy. So just challenge yourself with that. Have I been, even challenge yourself with this. Have we misused authority? So if any of you have ever been in a position of management, as a boss, you've been higher up there, have there ever been a time where you've misused authority, where it's like, what's good for you is I can do my own thing, all right? And so you do one thing, I'll do another thing, all right? So we can misuse authority. Have we slid on our morals at times? Have we looked at people and judged them based off their appearance, their nationality, or even their ethnicity? I want to challenge us with that. Have we been guilty of that in our own lives? And I was challenged preparing this, just thinking along these lines. It's like, have I kept someone, away from God, away from church, away from worshiping Him by something I've said or even something I've done? Now, and I was really challenged about that, because we can read this account and we can even read where, hey, they were in the Gentiles' courtyards, and they're really just saying to the Gentiles, like, hey, you don't have a place to worship during this time. And so I was challenged myself. It's like, have I kept other people away from God through things that I've done, through things that I've said? And so I want to challenge you all with that today as well. Like, think about things that you say and you do. You guys are way better than me, so you're all good. All right, but I also want to challenge us that if we've seen these things even going on around us, do we stand up for truth and what is right? Do we take a stand for morality and purity? And so maybe in your own lives, it's like you see something not quite right is going on. Do we just look away and just, hey, I'm just going to stay in my own little world? I didn't see that. It's like, do we see someone being abused? Do we see someone, being ripped off or mistreated? Do we just turn a blind eye and think, I've got other issues in my own life to deal with? I'm sure if you've been on social media, I'm sure you've seen videos where this is happening. Someone's been abused, maybe on a bus, on a train, out in the street, and people just walk on by. Maybe they're being attacked physically, and all sorts of people are just walking on by, just sort of crossing the street to stay away from it. And then you see the other videos where someone steps up and says, hey, mate, you need to back down. And we just think about that. And for me, I'm challenged on that as well, because it's like, what would I do? I've never actually had this happen to me, but what would I do? And for me, it's like, I'd hope I'd stand up and say, hey, we're all equals here as human beings. I'd hope I'd stand up and say, hey, let's just calm down and let's talk about this. I've seen this social experiment done a little while ago. There's this crowded shopping centre. It's all open. There's streets everywhere and there's restaurants sort of right there on the edge. And this fella, they're recording it obviously. This fella walks up, he's got a fuel can, only water in it, stops outside where their restaurant is, pours it all over himself, and then he's pretending to look for a lighter. and we just see everyone else just scatter and run and to get away from it. But off in the distance, you see a couple of fellas, they tap each other and say, hey, let's go stop this dude. And so they just run over to him, tackle him and say, hey, mate, like it's not on. And they were doing a social experiment just to see what do people do when someone else is in danger or where someone else is harmed or someone else is, attacking them, abusing them. And in a way, that's probably on the extreme, but in a way, here in this story, Jesus is actually challenging us to look out for those people around us as well. He was challenging them to say that, hey, you Jews, it's like you think it's all about you, but there are other people here as well that need to come to me to worship, to praise him, to honor him. So Jesus, he challenged the norm. He's challenged what has become accepted. He's basically saying, you've missed the point and purpose of this and made my house, you've made a place of worship into a marketplace. How many of us, when we are doing something or we hear a song, how about this? How many of us hear a song where it's like it's a redone version of the original? Like you've heard the original, you loved it, someone else does a remake of it, you're like, this is not okay because it's not like the original. And some of us are like that. For me, I'm like, oh, I like this remix. This is good. This is different. Imagine if this was the original. Well, then the original will seem sort of old and out of place. But how many of us go through life, we're doing things, and it's just like, well, this is the way I've always done it. This is what my dad did. This is what my granddad did. So this is how I'm going to do it. And in a way, this is really what's going on with the culture here. And with these religious people, these religious leaders, it was like, hey, this is how we've always done it. But Jesus comes and says, hey, he's challenging the norm. He's challenging why they do things, their heart and their motive behind it. And so today, I want to challenge us with this. Have we got a heart of worship? Have we got a heart? Have we got a life that worships God in all that we do? In all that we say and everything we think? Are we people that have a heart that live a life of worship? You see, the heart of worship is not about outward actions or rituals, but about the condition of our hearts. True worship is rooted in humility, obedience, love, gratitude, sacrifice, and devotion. It's about loving God with all our heart, all our soul, all our mind, or as I say, with everything we've got, and living a life that honours him. And we can read this story, and we can read where Jesus, he comes in, he clears the temple, and he says, hey, you've made this temple a place of worship, a place of prayer, into a den of thieves, into a marketplace. And so for us today, I actually want to bring it back to us and our lives, our hearts. Are we people that live a life of worship to God? Have we maybe put other things in the way of what God is really wanting to do in our lives? Have we put other things, as a blockage to maybe what God is wanting to do in our lives and even through our lives? Here's what we need to realise is that we need to have the vertical relationship healthy. So our vertical relationship with God healthy. We need to have it right so that the horizontal relationships, so those people around us, can be healthy and right as well. And I really believe that comes back from us having a heart of worship, living a life of worship to God. There's a song we used to sing in church many, many years ago called The Heart of Worship. If you've been in church for quite a number of years, you've maybe heard this song. And what it's really about is worship is not about the songs we sing. We come to church here and we join together, we're singing, we're worshiping God. That's corporate worship together, which is so powerful, which is so important. But worship to God is much more than just that. And really, that's what this song is about. And so today, we're actually just going to play the song and the lyrics are just going to go through. And so I want us just to really let this sink into us. And while it's playing, I really just want us to spend just a few moments really worshiping God. Us having a heart, having a life, having an attitude of worship.